Chapter 15 Nanogen Headquarters 29 October 10 o'clock a.m. It was a sunny day in central Oahu, and the view from Nanogen's meeting room swept across half the island. The windows looked over sugarcane fields to the Farrington Highway, then to Pearl Harbor, where Navy ships floated like gray ghosts, and to the right towers of Honolulu. Beyond the city, a ragged line of peaks extended along the horizon, painted in misty greens and blues. These were the Kuulu Mountains, the Pali of Oahu. Clouds had begun to build over the range. "It will rain on the Pali today. It usually does," Vincent Drake murmured, to nobody in particular, while he thought, "The rain will solve the problem. If the ants haven't solved it already. Of course, if there were any survivors, they might find refuge in a supply station." He reminded himself not to overlook this detail. Drake turned away from the window and sat down at a long table of polished wood, where a number of people were waiting for him. Seated across from him was Don Michele, the Vice President for Security. There was the Nanogen media officer, Linda Wellgren, and her assistant, as well as various other people from different departments. At the far end of the table, by himself, sat a slender man, wearing rimless spectacles. Edward Cattell, M.D., Ph.D., was the chief liaison for the Davros Consortium, the group of pharmaceutical companies that had supplied capital to Nanogen. The Davros Consortium had invested $1 billion in Nanogen. Edward Cattell monitored events at Nanogen for the Davros investors. Drake was saying, "Semi-graduate students. We were recruiting them to do field work in the micro world. They've disappeared. Our CFO, Allison Bender, has also gone missing." Don Michele, the security chief, said, "Maybe they went to watch the surf on the North Shore." Drake looked at his watch. "They should have checked in with us by now." Don Michele said, "I should file a missing persons report." "Good idea," Drake said. Drake wondered just when the police would discover the corporate car with Allison's body and the student's clothing in it. The car had fallen into a tidal inlet. He did not think the police would be able to make much sense of the crash. The cops are locals, he thought. Hawaiian locals take life easy. They go for the simple explanation, since that makes the least amount of work for them. Even so, he didn't want the police to get too interested, so he gave Don Michele and the media staff his orders. "Nanogen cannot afford any media attention right now. We are at a critical stage of our explosive growth. We need to work quietly while we smooth out the wrinkles in the tensor generator. especially the problem of the micropens. He turned to Linda Wellgrown, the media officer. Your job is to stop publicity over this incident. Wellgrown nodded. Understood. If you get media inquiries, be warm and helpful, but don't give out any information. Drake went on. Your job is to be boring. It's in my resume. Wellgrown said with a smile. Experience at media diffusive ambiguation in real-time crisis contexts. It means that when the crap is flying, I can be as exciting to the media as an Episcopalian vicar discussing how to toast a crumpet. Those kids didn't get into the tensor generator, did they? Said Don Michele, the security chief. Drake said firmly, Of course not. Linda Wellgrown jotted something on a legal pad. Any idea what happened to Miss Bender? Drake looked concerned. Frankly, we've been worried about Allison in recent days. She was known to be deeply depressed, possibly distraught. She had been having an affair with Eric Jansen. And when Eric tragically drowned, well, let's just say Allison's struggled with private demons. You think Miss Bender took her own life? Linda Wellgrown said. Drake shook his head. I don't know. He turned to Don Michele. Tell the police about Allison's state of mind. The meeting broke up. Linda Wellgrown tucked her legal pad under her arm and walked out of the room accompanied by the others. But at the last minute, Vin Drake touched Don Michele's elbow and said, Right. The security chief stayed while Drake closed the door. Now only Michele and Drake were left in the room, along with the Davros advisor, Dr. Edward Cattell, who had remained seated at the end of the table. He hadn't spoken a word during the meeting. Drake and Cattell had known each other for many years. They had made significant amounts of money working together on deals. Then Drake thought that Ed Cattell's greatest strength was the fact that he displayed no emotions. The man had no discernible feelings of any kind. Cattell was a medical doctor, but he had not treated a patient in many years. He was all about money, deals, and growth. Dr. Cattell was as warm as slate in January. Drake waited a moment. Then he said, The situation is different from what I just told our media people. Those kids did go into the micro world. What happened, sir? Michele asked. They are industrial spies, Drake said. Cattell broke in, speaking for the first time. Why do you think that, Vin? He had a mild, even voice. I caught Peter Jansen in the Project Omnicron area. That zone is forbidden. He had a memory stick in his hand. When I walked in on him, he looked guilty as hell. I had to grab him and rush him out of the zone. The bots could have killed him. Cattell raised an eyebrow. He was one of those people who seemed to have yogic control over their facial muscles. The Omicron zone doesn't sound secure. If a grad student can walk in there. Drake got annoyed. The zone is very tight, but we can't have the security bots active all the time. Nobody could enter the zone. I should be asking you about security, Ed. You paid Professor Ray Ho a great deal of money to let us recruit his grad students. I didn't pay him a cent, Vin. He got stock in Nanogen under the table. So what? You are responsible for the behavior of those students, Ed. You manipulated the students in Cambridge to get those students out here. You have not solved the problem of bends, Dr. Cattell answered in a bland voice. You planned to send them into the micro-world at considerable risk to their lives? Or am I conjecturing? Drake ignored him and paced the room. The ringleader is Peter Jansen. He went on, speaking rapidly. He is the brother of our deceased vice president, Eric Jansen. Peter seems to irrationally blame Nanogen for his brother's death. He's looking for payback. He's trying to steal our corporate secrets. He may be planning to sell our technology. To whom? Cattell asks sharply. Does it matter? Cattell's eyes narrowed. Everything matters. Drake didn't seem to hear him. A Nanogen employee is involved in the spying. Drake went on. A control room operator named Gerald Kinski. Why do you think so? Cattell asked. Drake shrugged. Kinski has disappeared, too. I think he's in the micro world, in the Waipaka Arboretum, where he's serving the students as a paid guide. What they're doing, I think, is trying to find out how we operate in the field, and what we are discovering. Dr. Cattell pinched his lips together but said nothing more. You want me to start a rescue? Don McKellar began. Drake cut him off. Too late. They're dead by now. Drake gave his security chief a sharp look. Nanogen has been attacked on your watch, Don. You didn't seem to notice. Is there anything you want to explain about that? Don McKayle's jawline tightened. He was wearing an Aloha shirt. He had an ample belly, but his bare arms, sinewy and massive, were fatless, and Drake saw how his security man's arms went rock tense. Don McKayle was an ex-Marine intelligence officer. A security failure like this, a spiraling operation under his nose, was unforgivable. I offer my resignation, sir, he said to Drake, effective immediately. Drake smiled and stood up, and put his hand on Don McKayle's shoulder. Feeling the moisture soaking the man's rayon shirt, it pleased him to see how a few well-chosen words could make an ex-Marine break into a sweat. Not accepted. Drake's eyes narrowed, and he got a careful look. He had humiliated his security chief. and now the man would be eager to please. Go to Waipaka Arboretum and collect the supply stations, Dawn. All of them. Bring them back here. They need to be cleaned and refurbished. That would prevent any survivors from taking refuge in a station. Dr. Cattell had picked up his attaché case and was moving toward the door. He glanced at Drake and gave him a nod, and left without saying another word. Ben Drake understood exactly what Dr. Cattell's nod meant. Clean up this mess, quickly, and the Davros Consortium won't hear about it. He went over to the window and looked out. As always, the trade winds were blowing across the mountains, endlessly lofting into the mist and showers. There was nothing to worry about. For humans without weapons and protective gear, survival time in the micro-world was measured in minutes to hours, not in days. Speaking to himself in a murmur, he said, "Nature will take its course." Chapter 16. Station Echo, 29 October, 10:40 a.m. The 7 graduate students gathered at the entrance of the tent. A sign over the tent's door said, "Supply Station Echo, property of Nanogen Microtechnologies." They were in a state of shock, filled with horror over the brutality of Kinski's death. They were also extremely surprised at how fast they had run. Denny Mannett had lost his tassel loafers. The shoes blew off his feet while he'd made a jaw-dropping dash that would have shamed an Olympic sprinter. Denny stood there in muddy, bare feet, shaking his head, and they had seen Karen King fighting the ants, her twists and leaps soaring through the air. It was clear they could do things in the micro world they couldn't have dreamed of before. They investigated the supply station quickly, as a raiding column of ants could show up at any moment. The tent stocked with various boxes, set atop a concrete floor. In the center of the floor, there was a round steel hatch. The steel hatch was operated with a real lock, like a bulkhead door of a submarine. Peter Jansen spun the wheel and lifted up the hatch. A ladder went down into darkness. "I'll check it out." He put the headlamp on his head and switched it on, and descended the ladder. He ended up standing in the middle of a dark room. As he swung his headlamp around, the beam fell across bunks and tables. Then he spotted a bank of power switches on the wall. He threw them and the lights came on. The room was a concrete bunker. It contained Spartan living quarters. Tired bunks were stacked along 2 walls. There were laboratory benches equipped with basic lab supplies. There was a dining area with a table and benches and a cooking stove. A door led to the bunker's power source. A pair of D-size flashlight batteries looming far above their heads. Another door led to a toilet and shower. A chest held some freeze-dried meals in pouches. The bunker was secure against predators, a sort of bomb shelter in a dangerous biological environment. "It's not a Disneyland ride out there," Peter Jensen said. He sat slumped at the table in the bunker, exhausted. He felt unable to think clearly. Images of Kinski's death ran through his mind. Karen King leaned against the wall. She was splashed with ant blood. The blood was gooey and clear, with a slightly yellowish color, and it dried fast. Danny Minot sat hunched at the dining table. He had resumed picking at his face and nose with his fingertips. A computer sat on the lab bench. "We could learn something from this," Jenny Lynn said, and switched it on. The computer booted, but a password screen came up. Of course, they didn't know the password. And Jarek Kinski's wasn't there to help them with things like that. "We're not safe here," Ricardo remarked. "Drake could show up." Amos Singh agreed. "I propose let's stock up with food and gear and leave immediately." "I don't want to go outdoors," Erica Mull said, her voice trembling, as she sat down on a bunk. Why had she ever left the university in Munich? She longed for the safe world of European research. These Americans played with fire. Hydrogen bombs, mega-power lasers, killer drones, shrinking micro-people. Americans were demon raisers. Americans awakened technological demons they couldn't control. Yet they seemed to enjoy the power. "We can't stay here," Karen said to her, speaking gently. She could see how frightened Erica was. "The most dangerous organism we face is not an insect, it's human." It was a good point. Peter Jansen suggested that they stick to the original plan. Go to the parking lot, try to get on a truck to Nanogen, get into the tensor generator somehow. We have to get restored to normal size as soon as possible. We don't have much time. We don't know how to operate the generator, Jenny Lynn said. We'll cross that bridge later. Rick said, we have some good tools for getting ourselves on the truck, including the rope ladder we found in the pack. He had been poking around in the supply boxes, and he'd pulled out something, another pair of radio headsets. This meant they now had a total of 4 communications radios. There is only one thing to do, Danny Manat murmured. Call for help. He held up a radio headset. You call Nanogen, Rick said to him, and Vin Drake will come around looking for us. And not with any magnifying glass, with the toe of his boot. Peter suggested that they keep radio silence, except in an emergency, in case Drake was listening for them. I don't see the point, Danny said. We need to call for help. Jenny Lynn did not take part in the conversation. Instead, she opened all the cabinets one by one and went through them carefully. She found a lab notebook. She opened it and began flipping through the pages. Somebody had jotted handwritten notes on the first few pages. Weather readings, logs of sample gathering activities, mostly. It didn't seem useful until she came to the map. "Look at this guy," Jenny said, spreading the notebook on the table. On a page of the lab notebook, somebody had sketched a rough map of the Manoa Valley. The map showed the locations of 10 supply stations scattered through Fern Gully and partway up the mountain slopes toward Tantalus Peak at increasing distances from the greenhouses and parking lot. The supply stations were designated by letters of the NATO alphabet from Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie up to Kilo. There was an arrow marked to Tantalus Base, Great Boulder. Tantalus Crater wasn't shown on the map, nor was the base. The map, as crude and incomplete as it was, still contained valuable information. It showed the basic layout of the supply stations. The location of each supply station was indicated by landmarks around the station, trees, rocks, clumps of ferns, making it possible to find the station as long as you could locate the landmarks. There was a station next to the parking lot. It was Station Alpha, and it was located under a clump of ripe ginger plants, according to a note on the map. "We could head for Station Alpha," Peter Jansen said. "Maybe not stay at Alpha, but at least we could search it for more supplies and information." "Why should we go anywhere?" Danny said. "Kinski's was right. We have to negotiate with Vin." "Don't you dare try," Rick was practically shouting. "Please stop this," Amar Singh said. He couldn't stand conflict. First there had been all the fighting between Rick and Karen, and now Rick was getting into a hassle with Danny. "Rick, people have different styles. You need to be more tolerant of Danny. Cut the crap, Amar. That guy is going to be the death of us all. With his stupid..." Peter Jansen could feel the situation spiraling out of control. The one thing that would certainly destroy them would be conflict within the group. They had to become a team, Peter thought, or they would soon be dead. Somehow, he had to get this quarrelsome, catty group of intellectuals to understand that survival required cooperation. He stood up and went to the head of the table and waited for silence. Eventually, they quieted down. "Are you done squabbling?" he said. "Now I have something to say. We are not in Cambridge anymore. In the academic world, you guys got ahead by cutting down your rivals and proving you're smarter than everybody else. In this forest, it's not about getting ahead. It's about staying alive. We have to cooperate to survive, and we have to kill whatever threatens us, or we will be killed." "Oh, it's kill or be killed," Danny said dismissively, an outmoded pseudo-Darwinian philosophy dating back to Victorian times. "Danny, we have to do whatever it takes to survive," Peter said. "But there's more to survival than just killing. Think about who we are as humans. A million years ago, our ancestors survived on the plains of Africa by operating in teams. Bands is a better word for it. We were bands of humans back then. A million years ago, we were not at the top of the food chain. All kinds of animals hunted us: lions, leopards, hyenas, wild dogs, crocodiles. But we humans have been dealing with predators for a very long time. We survive with brains, weapons, and cooperations, teamwork. I think we were built for this journey. Let's think of it as the chance of a lifetime to see incredible things in nature no one has ever seen before. But whatever course of action we decide on, we will have to work together or we'll die. We're only as strong as the weakest member of our team. Peter stopped, wondering if he'd gone too far. If he had sounded too preachy to these grad students. There was a period of silence as they digested Peter's speech. Danny Mannett was the first to speak. He turned to Peter. "By weakest member, I assume you mean me." "I didn't say that, Danny." Danny cut him off. "Excuse me, Peter. I am not a slack-lipped hominid with a beetling brow, clutching a chunk of stone in my hairy knuckles fist and cheerfully bashing in skulls of leopards. In fact, I am an educated person used to an urban environment. It is not Harvard Square out there. It is a green hell crawling with ants the size of pit bulls. I will stay in this bunker and wait for help." He rapped on the wall. "It's ant-proof." "Nobody's going to help you," Kieran said to Danny. "We'll see about that." He went off and sat by himself. Amos spoke to the others. "Peter is right." He turned to Peter. "I'm on the team." He leaned back and closed his eyes, as if he was thinking about something. Karen said, "I'm on the team too." Erica Mole finally agreed. "Peter is right." "I think we need a leader," Jenny Lynn said. "I think Peter should lead us." "Peter's the one person here who gets along with everybody in the group," Rick said and turned to Peter. "You're the only person who can lead us." It was confirmed quickly by a vote. Danny refused to take part. Now it was a question of getting the team's act together. "First, we need to eat. I'm freaking starved," Rick said. Indeed, they all felt ravenously hungry. They had been up all night without food, and there had been that mad dash from the ants. "We must have burned a lot of calories," Peter said. "I have never been so hungry in my life," Erica Mole said. "Our bodies are tiny. We probably burn calories a lot faster. Like a hummingbird, you know," Karen said. They took out the instant food packets, tore them open, and devoured them, sitting at the table and sprawled around the room. There wasn't much food, and it vanished in moments. They found a giant block of chocolate, and Ken hacked it up 7 ways with a knife. The chocolate disappeared quickly. Searching the bunker for anything that might be useful on their journey to the parking lot, They found a number of plastic lab bottles with screw lids and piled them on the table. The bottles could be used as canteens for water and to store any chemical compounds they might be able to gather. We are going to need chemical weapons, just like insects and plants have them, Jenny Lind said. Yeah, and I'll need a jar to hold my corral, Rick added. Corral? Karen said. Right. It's wicked stuff, Rick said. If you know how to make it. I do, Rick said huffily. Who taught you, Rick? A hunter? I've read papers. Papers on corral? Karen turned to something else, while Rick fumed. In one chest she had found 3 steel machetes. Each machete had a belt and a holster, with a diamond knife sharpener tucked into a pocket of the belt. Peter Jansen drew a blade and touched it with his thumb. Wow, that is sharp. As an experiment, he tapped the blade on the edge of a wooden table and saw the blade sink into the wood as if it were soft cheese. The machete was far sharper than a scalpel. It's as sharp as a microtome, he said. We used one in our lab, remember, for slicing tissue. Peter ran the diamond sharpener over the machete, whisking it along the edge. The sharpener was obviously to keep the edge in top condition. The edge is very fine, so it probably gets dull quickly. But we can sharpen the machete as needed. The machetes would be useful in cutting a path through vegetation. Karen King strung a machete around her head. Nice balance, she said. Decent weapon. Rick Hutter had stepped backward with alarm as Karen whirled the machete. You could cut somebody's head off, he said to her. She smirked at him. I know what I'm doing. You stick to berries and blow darts. Quit pushing me, Rick burst out. What's your problem? Peter Jensen stepped in. Despite their promises to work as a team, it was easier said than done. Please, Rick, Karen, we'd all appreciate it if you didn't argue. It's dangerous for everybody. Jenny Lind slapped Rick on the shoulder and said to him, Karen's just showing her fear. This didn't sit well with Karen, but she didn't say anything more. Jenny was right. Karen knew full well that the machetes wouldn't stop some predators, such as birds, for example. She had been needling Rick because she was afraid. She had revealed her fear to the others, and it embarrassed her. She climbed up the ladder and opened the hatch, and went outdoors to get herself calm. Under the tent, she began investigating the chests that were stored there. She found packets of food in one chest, and many vials and scientific samples in another. Probably samples that a team had left behind. She discovered a steel rod hidden under a top. The rod was longer than she was tall. It had a point at one end, while the other end had been enlarged and flattened. For a moment she couldn't figure out what this enormous metal thing was. Then the scale of the object clicked in her mind, and she knew. She climbed down the ladder and informed the others of what she'd found. "It's a pin," she said. It wasn't clear what the pin was doing in the tent. Possibly it had been used to pin something to the ground. In any case, the pin was made of steel. It could be shaped into a weapon. "We could use the diamond sharpeners to hone the pin. Make it really sharp," Karen said. "We could put a notch in the tip. That would make a barbed point. A killing point. A barb that would grab in the prey and wouldn't come loose. A harpoon." They had to work on the pin inside the tent, for it was too long to be brought down the ladder. Using the diamond sharpeners, they fell to work cutting and shaping the steel. First, they sawed off the flattened head of the pin, which shortened it and gave it better balance, so that a person could hold it and throw it. They took turns filing the point into a notch to create a barb. The diamond sharpeners worked quickly on the steel. After the work had been done, Peter picked up the harpoon and hefted it. It was a steel pole, massive, gleaming, balanced. Yet he handled it as if it weighed almost nothing. In the micro world, a piece of steel that size was just about heavy enough to do some damage to an insect if you threw it hard and it was sharp enough. Danny Mannert refused to help in any of the preparations. He sat on a bed in the bunker, with his arms crossed and knees drawn up, and watched. Peter Jansen felt sorry for him, and went over to him, and said quietly, "Please come with us. You're not safe here." "You said I was the weakest person," Danny replied. "We need your help, Danny. For assisted suicide," he said bitterly, and refused to budge. Rick Carter had set about making blow darts. He went a few paces outside the tent, carrying the machete for protection against ants, and cut several grass stems. Back inside the bunker, he sliced a stem lengthwise and began stripping out the harder strands of woody material. The grass seemed as tough as bamboo. He shaped the splinters into a couple of dozen darts. The darts still needed to be hardened. He went over to the stove and switched on a coil. He carefully heated and hardened the point of a dart by holding it over the hot coil. When he was finished, he tore open a mattress and pulled out some stuffing. He needed to fasten a puff of soft material to the tail of the blow darts, so that the dart could be propelled through the tube by a person's breath. In order to attach this tail puff to the shaft, he needed thread. "Amma, is there any more of that spider silk?" Amma shook his head. "It got used up saving Peter from the snake." "No problem." Rick rooted around and found a coil of rope. He cut a short length of the rope, then picked it apart into strands with his fingers. This produced a pile of very strong threads. He held a piece of fluff from the mattress against the end of the dart and wound a thread around it. lashing the tail puff in place. Now he had a real honest-to-goodness blow dart. Hardened tip, tail puff, the dart ready to be armed with poison. Even so, no scientist would assume the dart worked. He would have to test the dart. One of the grass stems, full length, made a blow tube. Rick fitted the dart into the blow tube, took aim at the wooden frame of a bunk, and blew. The dart zinged across the room, hit the bunk, and bounced off. Shit, he muttered. The dart couldn't penetrate wood. That meant it would never get through an insect's exoskeleton either. Fail, Ken remarked. The dart needs a metal tip, Rick said. Where to find the metal? Tableware. Stainless steel tableware. Rick took a steel fork from the kitchen area and bent back one of the fork's tines. He cut off the tine using the edge of a diamond sharpener, then honed the tine into an exceedingly sharp point. He lashed the steel point to a grass dart and fired the dart at the bunk. This time, the dart embedded itself in the wood of the bunk with a satisfying throck and stayed there, trembling. Now that we'll drive into a beetle, Rick said. One by one, he cut the tines off all the forks in the bunker until he had created a supply of more than 24 darts and several blow tubes. He placed the darts in a plastic box he'd found in the lab to keep them dry and protected from damage. Rick still had to make Karar, but in order to do that, he needed to collect more ingredients. Like a fine sauce, a good Karar contained a variety of ingredients cooked together, a chemistry of horrors. All he had for an ingredient at the moment was the china berry, which he'd stored upstairs in the tent. Nobody wanted a toxic china berry to be kept inside the bunker. It might give off fumes. It might make them sick. For the same reason, he could not boil Karar on the stove. He did not have the ingredients for Karar. Anyway, and even if he did, everybody could get poisoned if he tried to make Karar inside the bunker. The fumes would probably kill them. He would have to boil Karar outdoors over an open fire. They also turned up a pair of binoculars and 2 more headlamps, and packed them into the duffels. Amma Singh dug up a roll of duct tape. We can't possibly survive in a super jungle without duct tape, Amma joked. Rick Carter opened a chest and shouted, "A gold mine," and he pulled out a laboratory apron, rubber gloves, and safety goggles. "This is just what I need for making Karar. Excellent, excellent." He stuffed the things in a duffel bag. He'd have to cook the Karar in a vessel of some kind. In the bunker's tiny kitchen facility, at the bottom of a shelf near the floor, he found a large aluminum pot. He lashed the pot to his duffel pack, and then put the pack on his back. Testing its weight, he was surprised. The pack, though enormous, felt very light. I'm as strong as an ant, Rick said. Jenny Lind rooted through a supply box and discovered a military compass. The compass, battered and worn, was the type used by American soldiers ever since the Korean War. It could be used to keep them going in a straight line, but none of them could find a GPS unit anywhere at the station. It's because GPS can't tell us where we are, Peter explained. A GPS unit is accurate to about 10 meters. At our small size, that's equivalent to a 1 kilometer accuracy. In other words, GPS can't tell our location more precisely than a kilometer in any direction. By our measure of things, a compass is much more accurate than GPS for us. Suddenly, after the meal and all the work, a desire for sleep came over all of them. Peter's watch showed that the time was just before noon. Let's finish packing up our gear later. Kenneking suggested they hadn't slept the night before, but they were used to pulling all-nighters in the lab. Karen prided herself on her stamina, but even so, she couldn't keep her eyes open. Why am I so tired all of a sudden? She thought. Maybe it had something to do with their small bodies, all the calories they burned. But she couldn't focus, and she couldn't resist crawling into her bunk, where she fell instantly asleep. They all slept. Chapter 17, Manoa Valley, 29 October, 1 o'clock p.m. A pickup truck, black and new, swung into the parking lot by the greenhouses at the Waipaka Arboretum. Don McKellar, the security director of Nenogen, got out. He put on a knapsack and clipped a sheath knife to his belt. He knelt on the ground by a clump of ripe ginger plants growing along the edge of the parking lot, and drew the knife blade. The knife was a combat model, with a black blade. Delicately, he pushed aside plant stems with the flat of the knife until he found the little tent, Supply Station Alpha, hidden in the gloom of the ginger leaves. He leaned into the plants to get a better look, and with the tip of his knife pulled aside the tiny flap of the tent. "Anybody home?" he said. He knew he wouldn't hear a response, even if a microhuman did answer. He didn't see any microhumans anyway. Station Alpha had been tidied up and battened down a month ago, when it had been abandoned by the last field team to stay there. He plunged the knife into the soil next to the station and cut a circle around the stations, rocking the blade back and forth. Then he yanked the bunker out of the earth, the soil dropping off it, the tent fluttering and shaking on top of the structure. He stood up and banged the bunker on his shoe to knock off clots of dirt, and put the bunker into his knapsack. Don McKellar took out a map and studied it. Next station, Station Bravo. He walked swiftly along a path that led into Fern Gully. After 50 feet, he plunged off the path into the forest, not reducing his speed, moving easily through the jungle environment. According to the map, Station Bravo was at the south side of a koa tree, and the tree's trunk had been marked to make the station easy to find. A few minutes of trapping around brought him to the right tree. A reflective orange tag had been nailed to the trunk. He knelt at the spot, found the tent, and peered into it. Nobody. What about the bunker? He straightened up and called, "Hey," and stomped on the ground beside the tent. That would send them scurrying out if they were in the bunker. But he saw nothing, no movement, no tiny figures running. He knifed the soil and took out the bunker and put it in his pack with Station Alpha. He consulted the map again and looked along the hillside, peering up the sloping land that rose to cliffs and eventually to the heights of Tantalus. It seemed like a race of time to bring all the stations back to Nanogen. The micro-world had swallowed the students without a trace. Still he had to follow Drake's orders. It didn't bother him to be removing the only hope of survival for the students, since the students were dead anyway, for sure. He wasn't doing anything wrong, just cleaning up the stations. As he hiked laterally along the hillside, he dug up Station Foxtrot Golf and Hotel. He moved along quickly at ease in the jungle. Higher on the mountainside, he located Station India and dug it up. Higher still, he found Juliet and knocked the mud off it. But Station Kilo seemed to have disappeared. Kilo was supposed to be embedded in the ground at the base of a cliff among a tangle of vines by a small waterfall. Yet he simply could not find it. Eventually, Don Michele decided that Kilo had probably been washed away in a rainstorm. This happened to stations occasionally. The weather was hard on them, because they were so small. Then he doubled back, going straight downhill into the depths of Fern Gully. He was heading for Station Echo, which lay deep in Fern Gully, amid a stand of albagia trees. Hey, the sound thundered through the bunker, waking up all the students. The room jounced and boomed, and they were flung out of the bunks and tossed around the room, as if a major earthquake had just hit. The lights went out, crushing sounds of chests and boxes and lab equipment filled the darkness, and the room shook. Peter Jansen understood what was happening. "Someone's out there," he shouted. "Get out! Go, go!" He groped around for a headlamp by his bunk, found it and switched it on. The lights came on again. The batteries had been rattling on their contacts. Rick Carter grabbed his darts and started scrambling up the ladder, Karen King following him. The others frantically began to grab duffel bags, machetes, whatever they could carry. Rick, leading the way, reached the top of the ladder. He put his hands on the hatch wheel when suddenly the room felt like it was being yanked into the air, and he fell off the ladder, and everybody went sprawling. The room turned sideways, and a deafening noise, a hammering sound, made the bunker shake. Ah, stupid thing. The words seemed to shake the bunker like artillery shells landing. He'd cut a circle around Station Echo, gotten it out of the soil, squinted into the door of the tent. The tent had supplies scattered all around inside it. That looked unusual, so he decided to open the hatch and look inside. He pinched the hatch wheel between his thumb and forefinger, but the wheel snapped off. Now he couldn't get the hatch open. Shit. He laid the station on its side, on the ground, and knelt, and tapped on the hatch cover with the tip of his knife. But that didn't work. The hatch was tightly shut, and not even the tip of his knife would get it open. So he raised his knife over his head. He was split it open. The Kabar blade, as tall to the microhumans as a 10-story building, plunged through the bunker with a roar, driving shattered blocks of concrete through the room. The blade continued down into the earth, opening a gaping hole in the room. The edge began to saw raggedly through the bunker, while rocking back and forth. Rick clung to the bottom of the hatch, trying to spin it, trying to open it. He got the hatch open and thrust out his duffel bag, but then the bunker began rising up into the air. He saw the ground below. The bunker turned completely sideways, until he was lying on the ladder. People were crowding behind him. He began reaching for the others. He grabbed Amar and pushed him out through the hatch, and saw him falling away. The bunker was rising higher, tilting. Peter Jansen got next to Rick. "Help me get the others out," Peter shouted. They managed to get Danny out through the hatch. They heard Danny scream and saw him falling. Erica went next. Inside the bunker, Jenny Lynn had been pinned against the giant knife blade, her arm trapped between the blade and concrete. Ken King struggled to free Jen's arm, while the blade moved sideways, threatening to crush them both. "My arm," Jenny whimpered. "I can't move." A table slid up against Jenny. Then a concrete fragment smashed the table and rammed into Karen. Karen kicked the concrete away, surprised at her strength, and worked frantically to free Jenny. The bunker went down again, slammed against the ground, and the knife cut it in half, spilling Jenny and Karen out, revealing the sky above. Against the sky towered a man they didn't recognize. He opened his mouth and sounds rumbled out. He raised the knife high. Karen picked Jenny up and got her to her feet. Watching the knife rave over them, Jen's arm hung limply at a strange angle. "Run!" Karen screamed, as the great knife flashed downward at them. Chapter 18, Fun Gully, 29 October, 2 o'clock p.m. The knife entered the ground between Karen and Jenny's, driving them apart, and continued down into the earth for what seemed like a vast distance. Then it was withdrawn with a rumbling sound, shaking the world. Jenny was on her knees, holding her arm and moaning. Karen scooped Jenny up with one hand and began to run with her, heaving her across her back and sprinting at high speed. The knife plunged down again, but this time Karen had dived under a clump of ferns, still carrying Jenny on her back. The ground thumped and bounced, and the thumping receded. The man was walking away, carrying the broken halves of the station in his hands. They saw him toss the pieces into a knapsack. He moved off and was gone. As silence descended, Jenny was crying. "My arm," Jenny said. "It hurts. Hurts so much." Jen's arm had been broken badly. "Don't worry, we'll get you fixed up," Karen said, trying to sound optimistic. Jen's arm looked horrible. A compound fracture of the humerus, probably. Karen found a duffel bag lying on the ground nearby, and she opened it and took out a radio headset and began calling on it. "You guys, anybody? I'm with Jenny. She has a broken arm. Can you hear me?" Peter's voice came on. "We're okay. Everybody's accounted for." They gathered under the fern and placed Jenny on a leaf, using it like a bed. None of them had any medical experience. Karen opened the medical kit and found a syringe with morphine. She held it where Jenny could see it. "Do you want this?" Jenny shook her head. "No, too groggy." She might need her writs, despite the pain. Instead, Jenny accepted a couple of Tylenol tablets, while Karen ripped up a piece of cloth and fashioned a sling. They helped her sit up. Jenny swayed, her face ashen, her lips pale. "I'll be okay," she said. But she was not okay. Her arm was swelling dramatically, the skin darkening, internal bleeding. Karen caught Peter's eye, and she knew he was thinking the same thing. She was remembering what Gerald Kinski had said about the bends. You could bleed to death from a small cut. And this was not a small cut. Peter looked at his watch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon. They'd slept for 2 hours. The ground was scattered with debris. It was like a shipwreck. The duffel bags and the backpack lay in various places. Many other things had fallen out of the bunker when the knife had split it open. They found the machetes and the harpoon. Wick's china berry rested on the ground nearby. It had fallen out of the tent. They had survival gear and supplies at least. But where would they go? If Station Echo had been taken away, what had happened to the other stations? Had the man seen them? Did he work for Vin Drake? They had to assume the worst. They had been discovered. The stations had been taken away. Where to hide? Where to go? How to get back to Nanajan now? As they stood pondering what to do, the sky grew darker. A gust of wind tugged at the leaves of a haywale plant nearby, revealing the fuzzy undersides of the leaves. As Peter looked up, he saw the wind catching leaves overhead, flipping them over, tossing the leaves. Then came a strange sound, a deep sploosh and another sploosh. They watched in stunned surprise as a flattened sphere of water of enormous size fell on the ground next to them and exploded into 100 smaller droplets, flying everywhere. The afternoon rains had arrived. "Get to high ground," Peter shouted. "This way." They began to run, heading upslope, grabbing whatever they could carry. Karen carried Jenny on her back, while raindrops exploded around them like bombs going off. At Nanogen, Ben Drake turned away from his computer screen. He had been watching a weather radar scan of the Gualu Pali. Those trade winds were so dependable, as the winds ran up against the windward side of Oahu. They dropped their moisture on the mountains. The peaks of the Gualu Pali were some of the wettest places on Earth. Don Michele knocked on the door. The security man entered and placed the pieces of station echoed on Drake's desk. The beds are rumpled, toilets been used, and I saw a couple of them on the ground running. I ordered them to stop. I tried to stop them with my knife. They scattered like cockroaches. "That's disturbing," Drake said. "Very disturbing, Don. I told you to fix this." "What do you want me to do, sir?" Ben Drake leaned back and tapped a gold mechanical pencil on his teeth. A portrait of him hung on the wall behind him, painted by an up-and-coming Brooklyn artist, in which Drake's face seemed to fracture into bold colors. It was an image of power, and Drake liked it. "I want you to close off the security gate at the entrance to Manoa Valley. Stop the shuttle truck. The valley is to be sealed. And bring me your 2 best security men." "That would be Telius and Johnstone. I trained them in Kabul." They have experience in the microworld?" "Plenty," Michele answered. "What do you want them to do?" "Rescue the students." "But you're sailing off the valley. Just do as I say, Don." "Yes, sure." "I'll meet your men outdoors. Parking lot B, 20 minutes. The raindrops were pounding down, exploding, hurling gouts of water mixed with soil. Peter vanished in a cloud of spray as a raindrop hit him. The raindrop knocked Peter through the air and left him sprawled and coughing. The others ran, slipping and sliding, while more raindrops landed around them. Then came a sound like a freight train. It was a flash flood, running down a cleft in Fern Gully. It burst around a rock and past the base of a tree fern, and hit the people with a wall of brown water, sending them swimming for their lives. Karen was carrying Jenny along, when suddenly, as the flood hit, Jenny was torn from her back with a cry. "Jenny!" The water took Karen down. She couldn't see Jenny. She found herself clinging to a leaf, which was spinning around and around in the current. Rick was kneeling on the leaf in front of her. "Grab my hand," he shouted to her. Rick caught Karen by one hand and hauled her onto the leaf. She coughed and gasped. The leaf spun and ran along with the current. "I've lost Jenny," Karen shouted, looking around frantically. With her broken arm, Jenny would not be able to swim. Danny Mannett had climbed up onto a rock. It poked out of the floodwaters, whipping around it. A drowned earthworm floated past, rolling over and over in the water. Jenny Lynn struggled in the water, trying to swim, but her sling interfered and her broken arm flopped in a frightening way. Her head went under and came up. Rick lay flat on the leaf. "Jenny," he shouted. "Reach out, Jenny." "Hang on, Rick," Karen shouted, and she grabbed Rick's feet and held on, trying to keep him from sliding off the leaf as he reached out to try to save Jenny. Jenny rolled on her side and reached out with a good hand, but she passed by Rick, her fingertips just brushing his. He lost her. Couldn't get a grip on her fingers, and he shouted in frustration. Jenny was approaching the rock where Danny huddled. "Danny, please," she screamed, putting out her good hand. The current shook her body, threatening to drag her under. Danny Mannett reached out for her. He touched her hand. Her fingers closed around his fingers. He reached out farther with his other hand and managed to get his fingers under the sling. He pulled Jenny towards him. Then he felt himself slipping off the rock. Jenny screamed in pain as he wrenched her broken arm, but she welcomed it. "Don't let go of me, please." She reached with her good hand, caught Danny's shirt. "A drowning person will take you down with them." Danny knew about drowning people. They were very dangerous. He looked around. Was anybody watching? Then he locked eyes with Jenny Lynn. "Sorry," he said. He opened his hands and let her go. He was going to be pulled into the water and drowned by her for sure. Danny turned away. He couldn't bear that expression on Jen's face. He had done everything he could to save her. If he hadn't let her go, she would have pulled him in. Certainly they both would have died. Jenny was doomed anyway. "I'm a good person." He huddled on the rock while the water rumbled around it. Nobody had seen what he'd done, except Jenny. That look in her eyes. Ken screamed as she saw Jenny lose his grip on her. "No, Jenny, no." They glimpsed Jen's head bob once more in the current, and she went down, and they didn't see her again.